Dale Evans painfully died after revealing her husband's dark secret. This is the story of Dale Evans, the woman who stood beside Roy Rogers as Hollywood's beloved Queen of the West, and the painful truths she carried for decades before finally revealing them in her final years. Before she died in 2001, Dale opened up about secrets, heartbreak, and regrets that had haunted her throughout her legendary career, and what she shared shocked fans who had believed their marriage was a fairy tale. The real story turned out to be far more complicated, and to understand what Dale confessed, we need to go back to the very beginning, long before she ever met the king of the cowboys. A childhood of struggle. Dale Evans wasn't always Dale Evans. Frances Octavia Smith came into the world on October 31, 1912 in Uvalde, Texas, and her childhood looked nothing like the glamorous image Hollywood would later create for her. An unstable environment forced her to mature quickly, and for periods of her childhood she lived with her aunt and her aunt's husband, Dr. L.D. Massey, in Arkansas. She later described them as second parents to her, but the arrangement reflected the difficulties of her early years in ways she rarely discussed publicly. At 14 years old, Frances made a decision that would change her life forever when she eloped with a young man named Thomas F. Fox in April of 1927 in Crittenden County, Arkansas. Just 1 year later, at 15, she gave birth to a son they named Thomas Jr., though he would later be known as Tommy. The young marriage couldn't survive, and within a year it had collapsed entirely, leaving Frances a divorced teenage mother abandoned in Memphis, Tennessee, struggling to survive with a baby to care for. Music became her lifeline. In the late 1920s, she found work singing and playing piano at local radio stations in Memphis, including WMC and WREC, and her talent was obvious to anyone who heard her. Talent alone wasn't enough to overcome the obstacles she faced, though, because constant rejection plagued her, financial uncertainty followed her daily, and the stigma of being a single mother in that era meant society judged her harshly at every turn. Her divorce from Thomas Fox became final in 1929, but Frances wasn't ready to give up on finding stability. That same year she remarried, this time to August Wayne Johns. This marriage lasted longer than her first, but it too was destined to end, and by 1935 she and August had divorced. Frances Octavia Smith had been married and divorced twice before she was even 25 years old, and that's when she decided her circumstances would not define her future. The birth of Dale Evans. The turning point came in the 1930s, when she was working at radio station WHES in Louisville, Kentucky. The station manager, a man named Joe Eaton, looked at this talented young singer and told her she needed a new name because Frances Octavia Smith was too complicated, too difficult for announcers to pronounce smoothly on the radio. She needed something crisp, something catchy, something that would stick in people's minds. He suggested Dale Evans, and just like that, Frances Octavia Smith disappeared. In her place stood Dale Evans, a name that would become legendary in American entertainment. The new name gave her career momentum, and her silky voice began opening doors that had previously been closed to her. Eventually, she earned a contract with 20th Century Fox in 1942. But here's the thing. Along with that contract came tremendous pressure to erase her past completely. Studio executives looked at this rising star and saw a problem because a divorced single mother did not fit the wholesome image they wanted to project. Hollywood in those days demanded spotless reputations from its leading ladies, and Dale's past was anything but spotless, which meant they made her lie. The studio forced Dale to claim publicly that her son Tommy was not her son at all, that he was instead her younger brother. For years, Dale lived with this deception, playing the role of a wholesome rising star while privately grieving the lie she had to tell about her own child. She couldn't acknowledge her son as her son, and she had to pretend he was something he wasn't. This secret would haunt her for decades, becoming one of the first of many burdens Dale would carry and later confess near the end of her life. The studio didn't stop there either, because they also subtracted 7 years from her real age, making her appear younger than she actually was. Dale's entire public identity was being manufactured, layer by layer, lie by lie, and yet her talent was real, and her career continued to rise. Broken marriages and a fateful meeting. In 1937, Dale married for the third time, and her new husband was Robert Dale Butts, a pianist and arranger. They worked together musically and collaborated on various projects, But while their professional partnership had its moments, the marriage itself lacked real intimacy. By 1945, that marriage too had ended in divorce, meaning Dale Evans had now been through 3 failed marriages, 3 attempts to build a life with someone that had all fallen apart. Her career continued to grow through it all though, and she became a regular performer on the popular Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy radio show, which brought her to national attention across the country as audiences loved her voice, her charm, and her presence. Hollywood continued molding her public image, transforming her into a glamorous Western star, dressed in elaborate cowgirl costumes with embroidered gauntlets, rhinestone boots, and fringe jackets. The image was complete, and Dale Evans was becoming the face of the American West. Everything changed in 1944 when she was cast alongside Roy Rogers in a film called The Cowboy and the Senorita. It was supposed to be just another Western picture, but from the moment they met, the chemistry between Dale and Roy was undeniable, both on screen and off. 2 problems stood in the way though, because both of them were married to other people, with Roy married to his second wife Arline and Dale still married to Robert Dale Butts at the time. Whatever feelings existed between them would have to wait, but fate, as it often does, had other plans. Tragedy and a new beginning. Roy Rogers had married his first wife, Lucille Ascalez, back in 1933, and that marriage ended in divorce in 1936. He then married Grace Arlyn Wilkins in 1936, and she became the mother of his children. Together, Roy and Arlyn had 3 children, adopting a daughter named Cheryl in 1941, then welcoming their biological daughter Linda Lou in 1943. Tragedy struck just days after Dusty's birth, when Arline died on November 3, 1946, from an embolism. She was gone, just like that, and Roy Rogers, the king of the cowboys and America's beloved Western hero, was suddenly a widower with 3 young children to raise alone. Dale understood heartbreak, because she had lived it and survived it multiple times. And now, watching Roy grieve the loss of his wife, she became a friend and companion during his darkest hours. Their bond deepened over the months that followed, and what had started as professional chemistry grew into something much more profound. By the fall of 1947, Roy was ready to take the next step, and he did it in a way that only the king of the cowboys could. At Chicago Stadium, moments before riding into the rodeo arena, Roy sat atop his famous horse Trigger and proposed to Dale Evans. She said yes. December 31st, 1947, New Year's Eve. Dale Evans and Roy Rogers were married at the Flying L Ranch in Davis, Oklahoma, where they were filming a movie called Home in Oklahoma and decided to make it official right there on location. It was Dale's 4th marriage and Roy's 3rd, and both of them had been through enough heartbreak to know that nothing in life was guaranteed. This time they believed they had found something that would last, and it would last for over 50 years, but that doesn't mean it was easy, and it doesn't mean Dale didn't carry pain that she would only reveal decades later. A blended family and a secret finally revealed. After the wedding, Dale didn't just marry Roy, she embraced his 3 children as her own. Cheryl, Linda Lou, and little Dusty became her stepchildren, and she loved them as if she had given birth to them herself, and Roy in turn welcomed Dale's son Tommy into the family. For the first time in years, Dale could finally tell the truth about Tommy. He was no longer her younger brother but her son, her firstborn, the child she had been forced to deny for so long. The secret was finally out, and the lie that had haunted her for years was finally lifted. But here's the thing, the weight of those years of deception never fully disappeared. Dale later admitted that hiding her motherhood had eaten away at her sense of authenticity, a burden she carried quietly that shaped who she was even after the truth was known. Together, Roy and Dale built a large blended family, adopting more children over the years and taking in foster children until their household became a mix of biological children, adopted children, and children from different backgrounds, all united under one roof. They took in a girl named Mimi from Edinburgh, Scotland, and due to her British citizenship, she couldn't be legally adopted under American law at the time, which meant she became their foster daughter and ward instead. They adopted Dodie, a Choctaw girl, and Roy himself had Choctaw heritage, which made this connection particularly meaningful to him. Sandy came from a Kentucky orphanage, and Debbie was a Korean War orphan whose original name was Lu Ai Lee. The Rogers household was full of children, full of love, and full of the complexities that come with any large family. Robin and the book that changed everything. August of 1950 brought the birth of the only biological child Dale and Roy would have together, and they named her Robin Elizabeth. From the moment Robin was born, they knew something was different, because Robin had Down syndrome and serious congenital heart defects. At a time when developmental disabilities were rarely spoken about publicly, Dale and Roy faced whispers, judgment, and pressure from some to hide their daughter away. They refused. Instead of turning away from Robin, they embraced her with all the love they had, caring for her, cherishing her, and refusing to be ashamed of their daughter. Robin's health was fragile though, and her heart condition meant she would never be strong. Dale and Roy knew their time with her might be limited, but they made every moment count. August 24, 1952. Just 2 days before her second birthday, Robin died from mumps and encephalitis, complicated by her existing health conditions. The loss devastated Dale, and for a time her grief was so deep that even her faith felt shaken as she struggled to make sense of why this had happened, why her precious daughter had been taken so soon. Eventually, Dale found a way to turn that grief into purpose, and in 1953 she published a book called Angel Unaware that was unlike anything anyone expected from a Hollywood star. The book told Robin's story, but not from Dale's perspective, because it was written as a first-person message from Robin herself, speaking from heaven to God about her time on Earth and the lessons her short life had taught her family. Hollywood was shocked because this was not the kind of thing celebrities did in the 1950s, when nobody talked about disabled children, and certainly nobody wrote books about them. Dale didn't care about Hollywood conventions though, because she cared about helping other parents who had faced similar struggles. Fleming H. Revel Company published Angel Unaware, and it became a phenomenon, selling over 500,000 copies as families across the country wrote to Dale sharing their own stories of loss and renewal. Parents of children with disabilities felt seen for the first time, and Dale used her platform to demand more compassion and understanding for children with special needs long before it was common to do so. She believed Robin's short life was meant to open people's hearts, and she was determined to make sure that happened. The book's impact was lasting as organizations and charities began shifting attitudes about children with developmental disabilities. In Oklahoma, the county council renamed their Center for Children in Dale's honor as a tribute to Robin's memory, and this moment cemented Dale as more than just a performer, turning her into a voice for parents in pain who used her personal tragedy to advocate for compassion. Behind the public strength, though, she still carried private sorrow. The height of fame, the 1950s brought Roy Rogers and Dale Evans to the peak of their fame, and they were everywhere. They starred in a string of successful Western films, including Don't Fence Me In 1945, and on screen they were the perfect couple, solving problems, fighting villains, and always coming out on top. From 1951 to 1957, they became household names with The Roy Rogers Show on NBC, which ran for 100 episodes and was watched by families across America every week. Roy rode his famous horse Trigger, the Golden Palomino, who had become almost as famous as Roy himself. Trigger had originally been named Golden Cloud before Roy purchased him for $2,500 in 1943, and the horse knew over 150 tricks, making him beloved by fans everywhere. Dale rode Buttermilk, a buckskin quarter-horse gelding born in 1941 with the original name Taffy, who became Dale's signature horse and appeared alongside her in countless films and television episodes. Week after week, Roy and Dale entertained families, solving mysteries, promoting wholesome values, and often closing their shows with a message of faith and optimism. Their musical career flourished alongside their screen success, and Dale was not just a performer, but also a songwriter. In 1950, she wrote a song that would become their signature anthem, Happy Trails, which embodied everything Roy and Dale represented to their fans: hope, optimism, and the promise that no matter what difficulties life threw at you, you could ride off into the sunset with a smile. They became Hollywood's king of the cowboys and queen of the West, the ultimate Western sweethearts, and their image was one of perfect happiness, perfect partnership, and perfect love. No image tells the whole story, though. Tragedy strikes again. Their family continued to grow throughout the 1950s and into the 1960s, with the house full of children from different backgrounds, all united under Roy and Dale's care. Tragedy had not finished with the Rogers family, though. August of 1964 brought horror when 12-year-old Debbie, their adopted daughter from Korea, was killed in a catastrophic accident. She had been riding in a church bus from the Disciples of Christ Chapel, returning from a trip to visit an orphanage in Tijuana, Mexico. As the bus traveled on Highway 101 near Oceanside, California, a tire blew out, and the crash that followed killed 8 people and injured 42, with Debbie Rogers among the dead at just 12 years old. The pain of burying another child reopened wounds that had never fully healed from Robin's death, and Dale later admitted that losing Debbie was one of the darkest moments of her entire life. She described the helpless guilt that consumed her, wondering if somehow she could have prevented the tragedy. Grief weighed heavily on the entire family because they had already lost Robin and now they had lost Debbie too, meaning the house that had once been filled with so much joy now held so much sorrow. Trying to escape the shadows of too many painful memories, Roy and Dale made a decision to leave their large ranch in Chatsworth, California, where they had lived since 1955. Too many reminders lingered there, too much heartbreak in every room. They relocated to Apple Valley, California, to a property called the Double R Bar Ranch, and the new setting provided a fresh start, a place where they could try to rebuild without the constant reminders of what they had lost. The sorrow of Debbie's death never fully left Dale, though, and from that point forward, her speeches, her interviews, and her books carried a sharper edge of honesty about suffering and faith. The woman once presented as Hollywood's cheerful cowgirl now spoke candidly about grief, using her pain to comfort others while quietly wrestling with her own faith, activism, and private struggles. By the 1960s, Dale Evans and Roy Rogers were not just Hollywood figures, but outspoken voices for their faith, and Dale in particular became a bold advocate for Christianity in public life. In 1964, the same year they lost Debbie, Dale addressed thousands of people at a rally called Project Prayer at the Shrine Auditorium in Los Angeles. She spoke to approximately 2,500 attendees, calling for the return of prayer in public schools and declaring that it was high time that all of America stood up to be counted, that children should be allowed to learn of the Lord and be free. Her convictions were woven into everything she did, from the songs she recorded to the speeches she gave, and many admired her courage for speaking so openly about her beliefs. She also supported Barry Goldwater during the 1964 presidential campaign, aligning herself with conservative causes that matched her personal values. Behind the public image of strength and faith, though, life with Roy was not always as perfect as it appeared on screen. In her later years, Dale began to speak more candidly about the pressures inside their marriage, and the stories she told painted a more complicated picture than fans had ever imagined. Roy, known to millions as the gentle king of the cowboys, was described by sources close to the family as strict but fair with his children, with clear rules and consequences, meaning the easygoing cowboy persona was apparently different from the man at home. Dale confessed that there were stretches of loneliness during their marriage, because when Roy was away filming or touring, she often felt isolated, and the applause of audiences couldn't fill the silence of an empty house. These were not the kinds of things celebrities talked about in those days, when marriage was supposed to be presented as perfect, especially for America's sweethearts. But Dale seemed to believe that honesty was more important than image. Her greatest regret, she admitted, was the deception that had been forced upon her in the early years of her career. For more than a decade, she had publicly claimed that Tommy was her younger brother, and even after she revealed the truth following her marriage to Roy, the years of hiding her motherhood haunted her. It was a burden she carried quietly, something that ate away at her sense of authenticity, and it was something she felt compelled to share before she died. The final year, television was changing as the 1970s unfolded, with the era of the classic Western fading, but Roy Rogers and Dale Evans remained beloved cultural icons. They often appeared together on nostalgia programs, introducing their old films and sharing memories of Hollywood's golden age, and a new generation was discovering them, even as the older generation that had grown up with them continued to cherish their legacy. In the 1990s, Dale continued her ministry work, hosting her own religious television program called A Date with Dale on the Trinity Broadcasting Network from 1996 to 2001. Faith remained central to everything she did, even as her body grew weaker, and throughout her life, Dale had written extensively. She authored between 20 and 28 books, far more than the dozen often cited, offering hope to grieving parents, encouraging readers to rely on faith during hardship, and sharing the lessons she had learned from a life filled with both triumph and tragedy. Roy's health began to fail in the 1990s, and Dale, ever the steady partner, stayed by his side through his decline. July 6, 1998, at the age of 86, Roy Rogers died from congestive heart failure at their home in Apple Valley, California. The king of the cowboys was gone. The loss was both public and deeply personal for Dale because she was no longer part of the legendary duo that had defined her identity for over 50 years. She was now a widow, left to face her final years without the man who had been her partner through so much joy and so much sorrow. In those last years with Roy gone, Dale became more reflective and more honest, speaking openly about things she had kept hidden for decades. The loneliness she had felt during Roy's long absences, the strain of his strict parenting style, the lingering regret over presenting Tommy as her brother for all those years, all of it came out. These confessions shocked many, who had seen their marriage as a fairy tale because the king and queen of the West were supposed to represent perfect American values, perfect partnership, perfect love. Dale insisted on honesty though, believing that sharing the good and the bad was what made a person whole, and pretending everything was perfect helped no one. Her daughter Dodie later spoke about Dale's willingness to reveal the truth, saying her mother wasn't afraid to share both the good and the bad because that's what makes a person whole. Dale had spent too many years hiding the truth about Tommy, and she had seen what secrets did to a person's soul, which meant she wasn't going to let her final years be defined by more pretending. In her interviews and her writing, she insisted that she would rather be remembered not for her rhinestone cowgirl outfits, but for her ability to speak truthfully about suffering, because by exposing the fractures in her life, she believed she could help others heal their own. Even as she grew more candid, Dale never stopped honoring Roy in public, acknowledging the challenges while also emphasizing the love and respect that had kept them together for over 50 years. It was a complicated truth, a marriage built on devotion, shadowed by loss, and made human by flaws. The end of an era. February 7, 2001, at the age of 88, Dale Evans died from congestive heart failure at their home in Apple Valley, California. Less than 3 years had passed since Roy's death, and some said she was ready to join him. Her children described her final days as peaceful, with Dale expressing her readiness to be reunited with her husband and with the children she had lost, Robin and Debbie. Her passing closed the final chapter on one of Hollywood's most enduring partnerships. But the story she left behind was more complex than the image that had been projected on screen for so many decades. There was glamour, there was faith, and there was the image of the perfect Western couple riding off into the sunset together. But there was also sorrow, there were secrets, and there were regrets that took a lifetime to confess. Dale Evans and Roy Rogers were remembered as the king and queen of the West, but behind the legend were wounds that never fully healed. Dale's final confessions showed the world that even icons carry burdens too heavy to hide forever, and perhaps that's the most important lesson of all, that being honest about our struggles, even the ones we're ashamed of, is what truly connects us to each other. Happy trails, Dale. May you finally rest in peace. If you found this story meaningful, please subscribe for more stories about the legends you thought you knew, and let us know in the comments whether you think stars like Dale should share these truths sooner, or whether she was right to wait until the end.